From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power with David Weston.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York to our television and radio audiences worldwide, including the cable show, welcome now to Balance of Power. Today we have a very special edition of Balance of Power, starting with an extended interview with the man behind the vaccine helping all of us get our lives back. He's Dr. Bourla. He is the chairman and CEO of Pfizer. So welcome to Bloomberg. Great pleasure to have you here, Dr. Bourla.
Thank you very much for having me here.
So you're right at the center of something that has changed the United States, is in the process of changing a lot of the world, this vaccine. Give us a sense, when this emergency first happened, when was it? January, February of last year. Did you know you could do it? Because there were a lot of experts that said it could not be done. We could not have an effective, safe vaccine in that short a period of time.
Thank you for having me here. I wouldn't say I knew I can do it, but what I knew is that I have to do it. Because I would realize that the consequences, if we fail, will be dramatic. And although I have high respect for everyone who tried, I knew that very few will have the dedication that we are having. So in a sense, I was feeling that if it is not us, then I'm afraid no one else will find the solution. And that was not an option. So I treat it like if that's it. We do it and we have to do it.
So as I understand it, you had repositioned the company some when you took over as CEO more toward basic science and some of the high-end drugs, high-risk, high-reward drugs. So you may have been better positioned for that. But as you looked at the problem, what alternatives do you have? What tools did you have in your toolkit saying, I have to have a vaccine, how do we go about doing it? Because you ended up with mRNA, but that was not the only alternative.
Yes. First of all, let me say that I did reposition the company when I took over in 2019, but only because of the work of my predecessor. It's not because we have a new sheriff in town. He worked very hard to turn around the R&D. So when I took over, I found an R&D machine that I could believe. And this is why I took all the risk to say that let's find better homes for other businesses and let's focus on the science. Another thing that we did when we said let's focus on science, I knew that in biological science, equal importance with biology has now digital. And that was the time that we brought for the first time a chief digital officer at Pfizer. And we dramatically increased the investments in R&D and in digital. The digital infrastructure that we built in 19 and in the first half of 20 was what helped us dramatically to make this vaccine work. A lot of these things would not be possible unless we have this seamless machine that had digitized our clinical trials.
So you ended up with mRNA as the platform. As I say, not the only alternative, but also not one that had been used before, as I understand, for vaccines. Was this the first time that had been used as a platform for a vaccine?
Yes, it was the first time that it gave a successful vaccine. So when I realized that we need to go not only on therapeutics, because the first weeks I was trying to bring therapeutics to the world, but when I realized that we need also to go for a vaccine, I asked our scientists to suggest to me what would be the best path forward. And unlike other companies that they didn't have an option, for example. Moderna, they were so good in mRNA, right? For them, the option is, shall we go for a vaccine or not? Ourselves, we were good in very many technologies. We had high expertise with adenovirus, which is the AstraZeneca or the J&J, with proteins, which is the Novavax, and they came and suggested to me mRNA. And it was very counterintuitive, the decision. I told them, are you sure? If you do that, this is not going to be only the first COVID vaccine, that will be the first vaccine ever. And they felt strongly about it. And I had to place my trust on them, and I did. And that was pivotal.
You also, I think, placed your trust in part with BioNTech. You had already a joint venture working not for this sort of vaccine, but for a flu vaccine. Tell us about that relationship.
No, I asked also actually the same question. I told them that was the first question. The first question was, are you sure? Because that will be the first vaccine. And the second was, we need to do it fast. If we have to go mRNA, we'll do it with a partner. Are you sure? And they gave me exactly the answer that I knew, that we have worked with them for 2 years already in an mRNA flu vaccine. and we believe they are wonderful for that. I didn't have myself personal contacts with the biotech management, particularly with Ugur, who is the CEO and founder of the company. So I gave him a call immediately. And we hit it off from the first call. And we hit it off that well that when time came to do the deal, I told him, Ugur, it's going to be very challenging to put that in a contract before a few months. What are we doing? And he said, I'm fine to do it without contract if you are fine with that. And then I said, your word is good enough for me. And then we started working. After 2 or 3 weeks, we signed a letter of intent. And many people who do not know that our commercial agreement, the agreement that says how we are splitting, was signed in January of 2021. After everything was done and we had already sales. Because simply we didn't have time to do that. And the trust between the two of us was so deep.
So as a recovering lawyer, where were your lawyers? Normally we'd say you cannot do that on a handshake. This is
Yeah.
a huge venture, a huge gamble, as it were, and you're doing it on a handshake. That's not done in business typically.
That's not done in business typically, but that was very atypical situation. This was not it was not the future of the company. It was the future of the world. And we couldn't afford, none of us, to lose time first to settle all the legal language before we start doing the work. And the lawyers understood that.
Tell us about the timetable, because you said you needed to do it quickly. As I recall, I think President Trump said we'll do it in a year or so. What did you do in terms of setting an internal timetable for getting this done?
Yeah, it was, if we were trying to set a timetable based on what is the precedent, I mean, we would have we would have set a timetable for 8 years, because the precedent is 10, so let's do it faster, is 8. It wouldn't work. The way that I set the timeline was, we had the first wave, and then we were thinking that now it's going down because summer was coming. But I knew from the Spanish flu a century ago that the second wave came and it was way more lethal than the first one. So I told my team that what we should prepare for, it is something that will help us during the second wave, and that will come in late fall. So from my perspective, you need to bring a vaccine by end of October.
So it wasn't so much the science as we need to do it, because otherwise we're going to have huge problems with that second wave come
And
fall.
look, when you set a goal to someone that it is difficult, but within the parameters, let's say instead of 10 years, do it at 8. Or in manufacturing, instead of 200 million doses, I want you to manufacture 300 million doses. They always think within the box. They will always think to try to find incremental improvements to what we do. But if you tell them not 8 years, 8 months, if you tell them not 300 million, 3 billion doses, they need to think completely different. And this is what they did. They start re-engineering everything, and they came with genius solutions. People, they don't know what they can and what cannot do.
Boy, that's an extraordinary story. So give us a sense of what we have right now. First of all, one of the things everybody wants to know about is boosters. I mean, I got my Pfizer shot, the second one in February. Do we have a sense? Do you have any data that would tell you when I'm going to need a booster?
We are collecting a lot of data, but we are having some pivotal studies that are running, so we need to wait to see what the studies will tell us. But basically, holistically, as I see the sets of data that are available so far, I do believe that the studies will indicate that between 8 and 12 months, a booster will be needed. And of course, we are working on the data. We will submit to regulators like FDA in the US. And once and if approved, then CDC, which is the health authorities, will decide when they will recommend or not a booster.
So speaking of CDC, let's talk about possible side effects, because this is under emergency use authorization. It's not final authorization yet. I'm sure you're constantly monitoring possible side effects. As I understand, the CDC is taking a look at heart inflammation, right? Do we have any indication about whether we have a side effect problem with heart inflammation?
We are looking at all reports that are coming, and there are several reports that are coming. And what we try to do in situations like that, it is to see if an incident, for example, you spoke about some heart problems, is it higher in the vaccination group than what is expected to be in a group like that? Because when you have hundreds of millions of people vaccinated, for example, you will have car accidents, right? So is it higher? Then the vaccine is responsible for the car accidents, because maybe you make you dizzy. If it is not, then it is just normal life. So this is what we are trying to do. From the data that we have seen so far, we haven't seen a signal. But this doesn't mean that we should not be monitoring very deeply into the situation, because more data are coming and accumulated. So we do that ourselves with our databases, and I'm sure authorities all over the world are doing it as well.
As I say, you're under emergency use authorization. I think that you have applied for full authorization here. What's the timetable on that? And I ask that in part because we hear from some employers we don't want to require people to be vaccinated until we have the full authorization.
Yes. We applied already and we got a PDUFA date, 8 months. What does this mean, PDUFA date? FDA told us that they have 8 months at their disposal to approve or not the full authorization. I believe they will do it earlier, but it is up to them to see when that will happen. So it could be maybe by the end of the year or beginning of next year.
So most of us in the world got to see you just recently over in Cornwall, where you appeared with President Biden when he had a news conference announcing the purchase of 500 million doses from Pfizer. Tell us how that came about.
Well, I think U.S. stepped up in a great way to help the world. We had discussions with the government, and we had raised, and they had raised as well, that we need to do something for the world. We told them that we do produce a lot of doses, and we will be in a position, and actually we would love to find a way so that we can distribute doses to the low-income countries. And as you know, we had a tier pricing, so those doses, anyway, they are going at cost for us. But what the U.S. is doing is they are buying from us at cost, so non-for-profit. There is no profit for us. We provide the 500 million doses, but they donate them to the poorest of the countries, so they don't have to pay even the cost, those countries. I think that's great what the U.S. is doing. And we do it now. So 200 million of these 500 will be given this year in the next 6 months, and then the next 300 in the first 6 months of 2022.
Give us a sense of the path forward for the low and middle income countries, because certainly what we're seeing, for example, in India and elsewhere, is until we get everybody vaccinated around the world, none of us are fully safe. I think it's fair to say. So what is the path forward to deal with the low and middle income countries beyond the 500 million doses, which certainly is a good start?
No, I think there are two things that needs to be in place. One, you have enough vaccine production, so that enough for all, and then you need to have a price that is not an obstacle to anyone. The price was resolved already back in the way. For those countries, I think everyone is giving at a non-for-profit pace. In terms of in the manufacturing volumes, we have done tremendous progress, and this year expect to deliver 3 billion doses. So we made a pledge and that we will give to middle and low-income countries only from Pfizer vaccine 2 billion doses in the next 18 months. 1 billion of these doses will be this year. And then the next billion will be next year. The 500 that the U.S. purchase is part of these 2 billion doses. So I think will be enough doses for all these countries. Starting from now, the balance will be way more weighted towards low-income countries receiving doses than high-income countries. In the first half, high-income countries received more than the low-income countries.
Albert Bourla, I'm delighted to say Dr. Bourla will be remaining with us. He's Pfizer chairman and CEO. We're going to have much more to talk about with respect to Pfizer and the vaccines. And thanks very much to our cable listeners for joining us just now. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and radio. I'm David Weston. We are back now for more with Dr. Albert Bourla. He's chairman and CEO of Pfizer. So, Dr. Bourla, let's talk about the future here. What comes next for the world, for your industry, but for Pfizer in particular? Let's start with Pfizer. Obviously, you've accomplished something that nobody thought you would accomplish. It has really helped save the world. I don't think that's an exaggeration, actually. Where do you go from here? I mean, you're at a pretty high point. What's next for Pfizer?
I think the fundamental question that comes to me after this great success, it is, if we were able to do it for COVID, why not for cancer? Why not for Alzheimer's? Why not for many other diseases that they require treatments? That's in general for the industry. And ourselves, we are focused on 6 therapeutic areas that they are covering a broad spectrum of medical needs, most of them unmet right now. So I think there is some lessons learned. And thinking out of the box and re-engineering your processes and investing in R&D, creating a culture that can do the impossible possible, and investing in digital is key for the success in bringing new breakthrough innovations to the world. So this is what I think you will see from Pfizer in the next few years. More breakthroughs that change patients' lives.
So you mentioned Alzheimer's in there, and we just had an announcement about Biogen and the FDA. As I recall, I think Pfizer at one point sold an operation of Alzheimer's to Biogen. And I wonder about that in terms of the FDA, because there's some controversy about it. It was thought that the FDA may have varied its processes. It overruled its committee there, and some members quit. Is the FDA, you think, changing its standards so it's more willing to allow some experimental, if I can call them that, drugs be used in some circumstances?
I wouldn't make any general conclusions from what was the specific actions of the FDA. And for the specific action in the approval of this medicine, first of all, it is their prerogative to do it, and also wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment either on them or on the medicine.
Yeah, no. And I was just curious about the FDA because you deal with them quite regularly. At the same time, there's been a lot of questioning of the pharmaceutical industry, even some criticism of pharmaceuticals, particularly around pricing, things like that. You've earned some goodwill, I should say, on the part of American people and maybe around the world. Are you concerned you could go back the other way? And again, to pick on Biogen just for a moment, not that you'll comment on the specifics, $56,000 a year is a lot of money. Are you concerned that some people in your industry might raise some issues again that could get some criticism once again on Capitol Hill?
Of course I'm concerned, because I know that reputation is earned in drops, but you can lose it in buckets. And your reputation now is very high. We should not consider it given, and we should earn it every day. So coming back to the issue of pricing, particularly in the US for drugs, I think there is a very big problem, but not the one that people may think. I'll try to explain. Right now, the cost of medicines, the overall cost of the healthcare system, is around 10 to 12%. So by definition, cannot be the big problem when it is only 10 to 12%. And the cost is not going up, it's going actually down. For example, Pfizer in the first quarter, we reported 5% reduction in prices. Although we had high sales, that was because we had higher volume. Our prices went down 5%, the net prices on Pfizer. What is the problem is that the Americans, they don't experience this minus 5% that I had in my net pricing, because we have a system that basically forces them to pay out of pocket for their medicines, like if they don't have insurance, although they do have. This is something that needs to be fixed, and needs to be fixed urgently. And if this fix will cost money, our sector, Pfizer to start with, but I know all the other CEOs, they are willing to contribute financially from our bottom lines so that we can cover the cost. But what we don't want to do, it is to give money that will go to the black hole of the federal budget. We want everything that they contribute to go to lower the out-of-pocket cost of the patients. And that we can find great solutions.
So let's talk about that, because you have some pretty good relations right now, I suspect, with the Biden administration. You deal with those people quite regularly, from the president on down, Jeff Zients, everyone else. Have you had any conversations yet about maybe that kind of reform being brought to bear? Because that could be a feather in the cap of whatever administration brings it to bear.
No, I didn't have yet a discussion about that with the president. Nor with Jeff Zients, who all our discussions are focused on what can we do for COVID. But I have made very clear my position to the previous administration and to this one by speaking to everyone in the two political parties and in the Senate and in the Congress. We are ready to do that. And I think it will be a great opportunity for President Biden to pull together a bipartisan coalition that will reduce significantly the cost of medicines for the patients, which is the thing that is now problematic.
Finally, Dr. Bourla, to ask you to go beyond your direct expertise, but you certainly are in a position to address it. Where are we going because of the pandemic? In this sense, will we be able to travel the way we used to? Will the cities come back with the vaccinations? Will it actually get us back to something like what was normal? Or will we really perpetually be living in a somewhat different world going forward?
I believe in terms of controlling COVID, I think we will be able to control it to a level that we could have, if we wanted, our whole life back. But I think there were some lessons learned. Lessons that, for example, we can work remotely as good as by coming to the office every day. I don't think this will go away. Lessons that maybe you can do Zoom instead of travel for a business trip that will take you 2 days just to go and come. That I don't think we'll see coming away, not because of COVID, but because we learned that we can do it differently.
Boy, it has been a great pleasure and a treat, really, to have you here. Thank you so much, Doctor. That's Albert Bourla. He is Pfizer Chairman and CEO. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Larry Summers has been warning about the dangers of an overheating economy since President Biden first announced his American Rescue Plan. And after some skepticism, people are starting to come around, with even the Federal Reserve this week saying it may be cutting back on monetary stimulus, and 13 of its 18 members saying that the risks of too much inflation are greater than the risks of too little. For Wall Street Week, airing this evening, we talked with Larry today and asked for his reaction to the Fed decision.
I think yesterday will be remembered much, much more than most FOMC meetings as the beginning of the Fed's recognition that overheating is the issue that it has to deal with going forward. And given that overheating has been a major concern of mine, I'm glad to see that they have that recognition. But look, at a certain point, Churchill talked about it not being the end, not being the beginning of the end, but maybe it being the end of the beginning. And I think with respect to recognizing that the economy's now in a very, very different kind of place where demand pressures are a crucial issue, I think that's exactly what we have seen here. And I was glad to see in particular the change in the dot plot, which showed that the basic implausibility in a labor short economy of rates being at zero out to 2024 is something that now a majority of the members of the FOMC recognize.
That was Larry Summers of Harvard. The entire interview will air on Wall Street Week tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. He'll be joined by Rick Reeder of BlackRock, Susan Ketterer of Causeway Capital, and Ruchir Sharma of Morgan Stanley. Coming up, we'll talk about the plight of farmers across the country with CoBank CEO Tom Halverson. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. For Bloomberg First Word News, we go now to Ritika Gupta.
Thanks, David. AstraZeneca and the European Union both claim victory in a court tussle. The EU alleged the coronavirus vaccine maker was not producing shots for the 27-nation bloc fast enough. In a statement, AstraZeneca said that a judge in Brussels ordered delivery by September of more than 80.2 million doses. The European Commission was seeking 120 million shots by the end of this month. AstraZeneca was seen as key to the EU's vaccine efforts. Cases of the highly transmissible Delta COVID-19 variant almost doubled in a week across the UK, with more people admitted to the hospital. Health officials say the number of confirmed and probable cases rose to about 76,000 from 33,000 the previous week. Antonio Guterres was unanimously elected today to a second term as Secretary General of the United Nations. For another 5 years, he's at the helm of the 193-member organization amid divisions and conflict. This includes the growing impact of climate change and a pandemic still circling the globe. The Secretary General is calling for unity to overcome mistrust and a commitment to tackle inequality. Now that Juneteenth is officially a federal holiday, companies and state and local governments are trying to figure out what that means for them. Dozens of companies, including TikTok, Uber, and MasterCard, gave employees paid time off for the day last year. Nike is closing all of its U.S. distribution centers and retail stores on Saturday, as well as giving its U.S. corporate employees today off. Starbucks is keeping its cafes open on Juneteenth, but hourly workers will get time and a half tougher working that day. We'll have more of that later. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Rishka Gupta. This is Bloomberg. David.
Thank you so much, Ritika. American farmers haven't had an easy time of it in recent years, and President Trump had to provide substantial support when the U.S.-China trade dispute hit exports and made a bad situation even worse. But things may be turning around, and for a report, we welcome back now Tom Halverson. He's CEO of CoBank, one of the largest credit providers to the rural economy. Tom, great to have you here in the studio. Thanks for being with us. So give us a status report, because last time you were here, it was pretty rocky.
Well, thank you, David. It's great to be here and to be here in person. And last time I was just as COVID was really starting to get its legs in late winter of last year. At that time, we were talking about a variety of headwinds that were affecting the rural economy in general, the agricultural economy in particular. I'm happy to say that in addition to the fact that we've cracked COVID, or are in the process of doing so by the work of my preceding guest here and many other great scientists, the way out of the exit ramp for COVID is here, which means that we have a tailwind there, which we didn't have before. But we also have several other tailwinds, which have dramatically improved the circumstances for the rural and agricultural economies. One of, obviously, the rebound from the worst macroeconomic contraction since the 1930s is good for everybody. That rising tide lifts all the boats. But it's also true that global supply and demand dynamics in global commodity markets in general, and agriculture in particular, have driven commodity prices and agricultural prices up to levels not seen since 2013 and 2014. So soybeans and corn and wheat, for example. And the result is a dramatically better both cash flow story for producers and for agribusiness predominantly. And another tailwind, which we didn't expect, was a substantial increase in exports. And the big driver here is China, which has dramatically increased its agricultural exports from the United States for products like corn and soy. So when you put all of those things together, the situation for agricultural producers, for agribusiness, and thus for the rural economy, because those are very highly correlated, is dramatically better than it was a year ago, and puts the sector and producers in a much, much better place to weather the reduction which we expected in agricultural transfer payments, which were unprecedentedly large last year.
So let's take some of those and break them down, as it were. Let's start in reverse order with China. How much of that is because of the agreements, phase one, phase two? I lost track of them, frankly. The Trump administration negotiated. And how much of it is just relieving some of the tension?
It's going to be an all of the above answer here, David, because I've always believed that the Chinese weren't going to buy as much as they put in the agreement just to make good on the agreement. They're buying because they need it. I'll give you one specific example. They had to cull their hog herd substantially because of the illness problem that they had. Now that they're rebuilding their stocks, they need to feed all these animals that they're raising. So they're buying things that they actually need. Happily for them and us, the levels of purchases they're making get them pretty close to the terms and conditions and commitments that they signed up to in that agreement. I suspect that wouldn't have been the case if they didn't fundamentally need all the things that they are currently buying.
So we're seeing, as you said, commodity prices go up, not just because of China, but more generally. Is that because of overall demand increasing as the world economy, not just the United States, starts to bounce back from this pandemic?
It's partly that. It's partly supply constraints. Droughts in Brazil, other kinds of things that happen in different locales for different reasons. Actually, stock levels, right? We always have an inventory in silos all over the place around the world. Stock levels at the lowest levels in years. So there is the intrinsic demand of products that we need right now to turn into food to feed the world. But there's also the fact that you need to have inventory in the pipeline and in your infrastructure, and those levels are very low. So you're probably leading up to, so where's this going? And what I would tell you is it's almost certain that this year, for sure, will be a very robust year for the producers in the United States, particularly grain, corn and beans and wheat and the like. How long this will go then turns into a story of, well, what's actually happening in fundamental supply and demand around the world. We have the most efficient, most productive, highest quality, safest food produced anywhere in the world, and these markets and these producers are amazing at responding to price signals. So I'm very confident, as we have seen in the past, that they will respond to the pricing signals in the marketplace, and they'll produce a lot. And over time, these prices will not likely stay at these levels, but they certainly will stay in this zip code this year.
One of the things that we are talking about all the time now, including the Fed Chair Jay Powell this week, is prices, inflation. What are the farmers seeing, both in terms of increased prices in the inputs that they have to pay for, but also in their ability to pass it along?
It's a great question. There is a dramatic rise in inflation in input prices for producers, without question. There are very substantial bottlenecks in the agricultural economy. There are both on the input side and on the output side, right? It might be hard to get what you need as an input, and the prices have gone up a lot. And you might need a container to put your product in to send it to China, and you can't get one, or the piece you need is sitting on a boat outside of Long Beach and it can't get into the dock. All of these things together are having an impact to put supply constraints in place, which is the fuel that causes inflationary pressures. So to the extent that high prices allow a producer to sell their product at higher prices and enhances their margin, it's immediately translating into cost pressure on the other side for the reasons we described.
And does that mean our food prices are going up?
Yes, they're already going up. They will continue to go up, I think. The debate about how high and how long, I think, becomes very much the same debate we're having with Jay Powell and others about the macroeconomy, right? How high is inflation going to go for consumers in a broad basket of goods? And how long is that going to go on? What does that mean for interest rates? I suspect there's still inflationary pressure pushing its way through the process for some time. I'm not capable to tell you where all of that peaks out, but there's still more to come, I think.
Let me sneak in one more, and that's in the employment situation, because as COVID hit, there was concern about workers, particularly some of the people who work out in the fields and things like that. Is there a labor shortage for farmers right now?
There absolutely is. That is highly idiosyncratic to the local area. I was talking to a producer from California a couple of days ago who was showing me pictures about a fully robotic piece of field equipment. Doesn't require any human beings to operate it. Battery powered, runs itself, going through the fields. And particularly in California, they have very severe labor shortages, and that cost pressure and supply constraint to just get people to work is going to accelerate what we've seen in so many other industries during the pandemic, which is a transfer to technology to find machines and build machines and design things that can do right now and next year things that we used to be able to find workers to do. And I think that phenomena is with us for good, and it will only accelerate.
It's fascinating. Thank you so much, Tom. It's always great having you here. That's Tom Halverson. He's CEO of CoBank. He's going to be staying with us for our second hour of Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio. We're going to talk to him about what the move to electric vehicles could mean for rural America. Coming up here right away, our colleague Eric Shaskar traveled to Venezuela for an exclusive interview with President Nicolas Maduro. We'll have some of that interview next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro has made it clear he wants to normalize relations with the United States and hopes the Biden administration will lift harsh U.S. sanctions. In an exclusive interview with Bloomberg's Eric Shaskar this week in Caracas, he explained how he sees the relationship between the two nations.
Siempre hay que recordar, Eric.
We always have to remember, Eric, that we faced 4 years of the Trump administration, which were 4 years of direct aggression, of cruel sanctions, very cruel, and of damage to the Venezuelan economy and society. The politics that Donald Trump installed and left as legacy against Venezuela are extremist politics, irrational, right? That caused a complete rupture between the United States and Venezuela.
Presidente Joe Biden ha llegado.
President Joe Biden has arrived, making a proposal to the world. His first speech on January 20th, he said that we don't have to demonize anybody in politics. I would say to President Joe Biden to stop from the White House, from the Department of State, the demonization of Venezuela, the demonization of the Bolivarian Revolution, the demonization of President Nicolas Maduro, and that hopefully we can find paths of reconciliation, of respect, paths of mutual benefit, and paths that allow us to normalize relations between the United States and Venezuela.
¿Ha visto señales ya?
Have you seen any signals
Una postura
that suggest Joe Biden has a different posture,
especialmente
especially as it concerns the Venezuela question?
¿Quieres que te sea sincero, muy sincero?
Do you want me to be sincere?
Ninguna.
Very sincere? There hasn't been a single positive sign. None. It's 5 months where, okay, they're settling into power. The only different thing that might be heard from some spokespeople of the White House and of the Department of State is that they agree with the political dialogue between Venezuelans, without intervention, to look for democratic political changes in the country. That's the only thing. They must abandon the demonization that they make of Venezuela, of our revolution, democratic, constitutional, pacific, and of President Nicolas Maduro, to create real foundations, objective, credible, verifiable, of a process of negotiation to regularize the relations between the two countries, in terms of win-win, which is what we aspire to since a long time ago.
A win-win is possible, in your opinion?
Totalmente.
Absolutely. We've already shown that. Of course it's possible to win-win. They know it in the financial sector, the bondholders, with whom we had an impeccable relationship, and they know it's possible to invest in Venezuela and win-win, as long as this whole persecution and the sanctions aren't there. The oil sector knows it, who has invested in Venezuela, and who still maintains investments in Venezuela, that we can advance much more. The cultural sector knows it. The social sector. The political sectors know it.
For more on this really fascinating conversation, let's welcome Bloomberg's Eric Shaskar. So, Eric, I'm so glad you did this. It's utterly fascinating, as I say. But watching this, I actually went down and interviewed Hugo Chavez back in the day in that same room, in that suite that he has. And when Chavez got sick, everybody said Maduro might be the man, and they said, we won't give him 60 days. He's not strong enough. He's not smart enough. And now, all these years later, he's still there. What is the source of his staying power?
Well, first of all, he's proven to be a great party boss. So much like other countries that have similar political structures, we could talk about China, we could talk about Cuba, we could talk about Russia. It requires somebody who can corral the disparate forces inside his quote-unquote socialist/communist party, and Maduro has been able to do that exceedingly well. A second factor is the ineptitude of the opposition. Now, there was a very narrow election that Maduro won in 2013 against a guy named Enrique Capriles, who is still in the running as a politician of significance, even though he is barred from actually seeking office at the moment. And subsequent to that, there were 2 attempts on his life. There was an uprising in 2017 and 2018, botched, right? There were drones, you may remember that. And then there was a catastrophic joke of a coup back in April 30th of 2019. There are lots of reasons to believe that the U.S. either was involved in those efforts or had given tacit approval for those efforts, but clearly the U.S. didn't get involved enough, if that's in fact what Donald Trump and his government wanted to achieve, regime change, because they failed. And that only served to make Maduro stronger. And then finally, he's been playing the populist card. Yeah. If you watch him on state television, and he takes to state television 3 or 4 times a week, it's populist theater. And they've narrowed the availability of information. CNN, for example, you can't get down there any longer. And so it's harder for people to have, to know that there's another truth, let's put it that way.
Where do we go from here? Because listening to your conversation, it seemed to me, at least, that President Maduro really wants to find a way to climb down off this parapet. He doesn't want to be at daggers drawing with the United States. He needs it for his economy. And yet, in the discussion, it wasn't clear to me the door he was opening.
He needs it for himself. He is the torchbearer for Chavismo, right? This is the legacy of Hugo Chavez. And he doesn't want to go down as the guy who failed Venezuela. He wants to go down as the guy who saved Venezuela. You're absolutely right that he is not being very clear about what he's prepared to offer the United States, but he sees a window of opportunity because the United States government is no longer pursuing regime change. It wants free and fair elections, and those are two very, very different things, even if at the end of the day, they deliver the same result. It's just how you get there. And so he's prepared to work with the opposition, the fragmented opposition, and the fragmentation, let's be clear, serves his interests, but he's prepared to work with the opposition. He's prepared to work under the Norway apparatus and to talk to the United States about finding a way out of this jam.
Well, as I say, I couldn't be more fascinated. I'm really glad you did this, and thanks for coming and sharing with us. That is Bloomberg's Eric Shaskar. Coming up here, tomorrow is the first Juneteenth, when the day marks a national holiday. We talk with Bloomberg's Jarrell Dillard about what comes next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Yesterday, President Biden signed into law making June 19th, Juneteenth, a federal holiday, marking the day in 1865 when federal troops entered Galveston with the news that all slaves had been made free some 2 years before. To take us through what else the Biden administration has on its agenda to address some of the lasting effects of racial injustice, welcome now Bloomberg congressional reporter Jarrell Dillard. So, Jarrell, thank you so much for joining us here. It's wonderful we have this commemoration. Certainly everyone has to be in favor of it, but it's just a day. It's a federal holiday. There are so many lingering effects of 400 years of racial injustice. What is in the Biden agenda that might help to start address some of that?
Well, some other major pieces of legislation, both for President Biden and Democrats in Congress. One would be a voting rights bill that has already passed the House, and another would be the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which has also already passed the House. But you have the issue in the Senate where you have the filibuster, which requires most legislation to receive 60 votes in order to pass. So Democrats have that issue with getting 10 Republicans to come on board to vote for these pieces of legislation.
So bring us up to speed on the voting issue, because goodness knows that's been an issue for Black Americans, Black voters throughout our history. Where are we on that? Joe Manchin has an alternative, and I understand that maybe some Democrats are saying maybe it's not altogether a bad idea.
Yeah, so the jury's still out on that. We're seeing where that plays out. Manchin did suggest some fixes to the bill as it stands, but we're not sure whether the rest of his party is on board with what he is trying to accomplish with this. It's really up in the air. It's a back and forth. The Republicans, since the last election, have introduced on the state level many different bills that are restricting voting rights. And so that's what Democrats are trying to address with this bill.
And finally, on the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, there was a bipartisan effort on behalf of a Republican and a Democratic senator. Why doesn't that get done?
The issue is they need 10 Republican senators to come on board with them, and they just don't seem to have those numbers yet. There are too many Republicans in the Senate who are in objection to the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act.
Okay, it's a real pleasure to have you with us. Thank you very much. That's Bloomberg's Jarrell Dillard on Juneteenth. Coming up, Balance of Power continues on Bloomberg Radio. In our second hour, we're going to talk to Carly Fiorina, former CEO of HP, about the corporate response to Juneteenth. We'll also have a conversation with Richard Trumka of the AFL-CIO about exactly what the Fed did this week and whether it indicates a backing off from their commitment to full employment. That's coming up, and this is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio.